Part 3, Chapter 4. Between the Ears. What you are thinking, what shape your mind is in, is what makes the biggest difference of all. Willie Mays. Competitive golf is played mainly on a 5.5-inch course, the space between your ears. Bobby Jones. Oftentimes, an athlete will go into a performance nosedive. In sports psychology, one means of investigating what happened and why is to retrieve the equivalent of the black box and voice recorder. I slid the video into the slot and pressed the play button. The major league pitcher seated in my office recognized the figure on the big screen TV. It was himself. As he stood up on the ground, messed up again. Equivalent. Alright. Part 3, Chapter 4, Between the Ears. What you're thinking, what shape your mind is in, is what makes the biggest difference of all. Willie Mays. Competitive golf is played mainly on a 5.5-inch course, the space between your ears. Bobby Jones. Oftentimes, an athlete will go into a performance nosedive. In sports psychology, one means of investigating what happened and why is to retrieve the equivalent of the black box and voice recorder. I slid the video into the slot and pressed the play button. The major league pitcher seated in my office recognized the figure on the big screen. It was himself. As he stood on the mound and delivered a warm-up pitch, then another, the sights, sounds, feelings, and emotions of that unpleasant day began to come back to him. On the screen, the leadoff batter stepped slightly into the box, settling in, bat waving back and forth. He turned his eyes toward the figure 60 feet 6 inches away. I then asked the pitcher what he was thinking at that moment just before the game began. I didn't have very good stuff in warm-ups, he began. I was thinking, I hope I walk this guy. What else? As he spoke, I almost could hear the dread rising in his voice, like water in a flooding basement. He's really quick. If he gets on, he'll probably take second. Our catcher's arm not that great. If he steals second, there's a good chance that they'll score. And we haven't been having a... God. Alright. Okay. Part 3, Chapter 4, Between the Ears. What you're thinking, what shape your mind is in, is what makes the biggest difference of all. Willie Mays. Competitive golf is played mainly on a 5.5-inch course, the space between your ears. Bobby Jones. Oftentimes, an athlete will go into a performance nosedive. In sports psychology, one means of investigating what happened and why is to retrieve the equivalent of the black box and voice recorder. I slid the video into the slot and pressed the play button. The major league pitcher seated in my office recognized the figure on the big screen TV. It was himself. As he stood on the mound and delivered a warm-up pitch, then another, The sights, sounds, feelings, and emotions of that unpleasant day began coming back to him. On the screen, the leadoff batter stepped slightly into the box, settling in, bat waving back and forth. He turned his eyes toward the figure 60 feet 6 inches away. I then asked the pitcher what he was thinking at that moment, just before the game began. "I didn't have very good stuff in warm-ups," he began. "I was thinking, I hope I don't walk this guy. What else?" As he spoke, I almost could hear the dread rising in his voice, like water in a flooding basement. "He's really quick. If he gets on, he'll probably take second. Our catcher's arm's not that great. If he steals the second, there's a good chance they'll score. And we haven't been very good coming from behind. Listen to yourself. Listen." The pitcher grinned sheepishly. At that time, he hadn't been aware of his negative thinking. Now, he was hearing himself, in his own words, laying out a scenario of defeat. And he hadn't thrown his first pitch. Is it any wonder he performed poorly? Then I asked what he could have been thinking. The pitcher studied his image on the screen. "I've got good control of my fastball. One positive thought led to another. Even if I walk him, I can keep the ball down and get the next guy to hit into a double play. Don't worry about the batter. One pitch at a time. Just focus, relax, hit the mitt." We all have conversations going on inside our heads. I call it self-talk. Every athlete hears two competing voices. One is a negative critic, and the other is a positive coach. Which voice we listen to is a matter of choice. Golfer Arnold Palmer kept this saying in his locker: "If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think that you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win, but you think you can't, it's almost certain you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost. For out in the world you'll find success begins with the fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. Life's battles do not always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later the man who wins is the man who thinks he can." Like our beliefs and attitudes, our thinking can be a powerful ally. How we think affects how we feel, and how we feel affects how we perform. My job is to help athletes think clearly and use their minds effectively by teaching them to turn their negative critic into a positive coach. One day, I was at Yale Field in Connecticut visiting the Mariners' AA club, the New Haven Ravens. One of the young center fielders was struggling in the batting cage. "Mac, I'm never going to hit this," he said. Between cuts, he shook his head. "I don't have a clue." His negative critic was hard at work, shouting into his ear with a bullhorn. "Let me ask you something," I said. "If Ken Griffey Jr. thought like that, how good a batter do you think he would be?" The question stopped the kid. He knew that if Griffey thought the way the minor league did, the Mariners sluggers wouldn't perform well either. The kid's thinking was hurting him more than his swing. He needed to change his thinking, or at least get his mind a rest. Ted Williams offered some sage advice. If you don't think too good, then don't think too much. Just as we have irrational and unrealistic beliefs, we are all guilty of distorted and dysfunctional thinking. Atlanta Braves pitcher Tom Glavine said, "I went through 'don't do this' syndrome at certain times in my career when facing certain batters. I told myself not to hang a curveball. Sure enough, I did. Now I focus on 'do this.' It's a significant difference." I worked with a professional golfer who listened to his negative critic. Like the pitcher, he watched himself on the video. What was he thinking on the shot? How about the next? After listening to his negative narrative, I asked who would be a positive coach for him. He said, "Ken Venturi. As we returned to the video, I asked what Venturi would tell him. He would say, "I'm good enough to do this. I can hit the shot. Just trust my swing." Tiger Woods has a positive coach with him at all times. During the last round of the 1999 PGA Championship, he faced an 8-foot par putt on the 17th hole. He had to make it to keep the lead. Sergio Garcia was one shot back. As Tiger Woods stood over the ball, he said he heard a familiar voice. It was the soft voice of a man who taught him to play golf. That man wasn't in gallery. He was several miles away in a hotel room, watching the tournament on TV. "Trust your stroke," the voice whispered. "Trust your stroke." Tiger heard and trusted. The putt fell at the victory party that night. Earl Woods' son said, "I heard you, Pop." Which voice do you hear? Which is louder? The negative critic or the positive coach? You can choose to listen to the voice that offers and reinforces positive thought. It has been said that thoughts become words, words become actions, and actions become habits. Habits become character, character becomes your destiny. Chapter 5. Servant or Master. Learn to control your emotions, or they will control you. Edgar Martinez. A ball player who loses his head can keep his cool. A ball player who loses his head and can't keep his cool is worse than no player at all. The Philadelphia Phillies had just blown a game against the Houston Astros, surrendering the winning run in the bottom of the ninth. When the manager stormed into the losing team clubhouse and found his players enjoying a post-game buffet, his eyes widened. He felt his blood pressure rise. Suddenly, with a wide sweep of his arms, the skipper cleared the table, sending drumsticks, potato salad, and a tray of assorted fruit flying. "Boy," a rookie whispered as the room, splattered with barbecue sauce, fell deathly silent. "The foot sure goes fast around here." Sports arouses emotions and passions like no other endeavor. We see that fervor in highly competitive athletes like Jimmy Connors, who said, "I thrive on emotions. The emotional energy allows me to rise to my level of play." We also see it in those who follow sports as spectators. The achievements of one athlete can energize and inspire an entire nation. Siri Pak left her homeland as a virtual unknown. When the young golfer returned to Seoul after winning 4 LPGA's tournaments during her rookie year, thousands greeted her at the airport. The Korean people took her into their hearts. Pak had become a national symbol of triumph over adversity. Our attitudes, belief systems, and thoughts create our reality. They also create our emotions. Joy is one, pride another. 2 are basic emotions, are anger and fear. Anyone who has participated in athletes probably has experienced all 4. In Getting Over Yourself, we mentioned an evolutionary primitive mechanism called fight or flight response. When we feel threatened or stressed, our heart beats faster, our breathing quickens, and our hands may sweat. It's like gulping an adrenaline cocktail. We respond with the urge to flee or fight back. The latter often leads to anger. Cus D'Amato, who trained Mike Tyson, said emotions, particularly anger, are like fire. They can cook your food and keep you warm, or they can burn your house down. Many great athletes use anger in a positive way. Anger motivates them. Anger steals their resolve. It is much better to become angry than to become afraid. Last season, Randy Johnson was at the plate facing Sterling Hitchcock, who had just given up back-to-back home runs. The San Diego pitcher struck Johnson on the left elbow with a pitch. Johnson flashed with anger. He could have initiated a fight and risked ejection, but he didn't. Channeling his anger, the Arizona pitcher knew, as the big unit went back to the mound, struck out 11 batters, pitched a complete game, and extended his season record to 7-0. Albert Beal uses his anger to crush baseballs over the fence. Pete Rose warned, "When you mess with the pride, you're going to get in trouble." Michael Jordan is another prideful man. When challenged on the basketball court, he exhibited what golfer Sam Snead called a cool mad. In the playoffs, Jordan was always the smiling assassin. Sports can be frustrating. It is easy to respond out of anger without the thought of control. When he was 12 years old, Bjorn Borg couldn't control his temper. "I was throwing my racket all over the place, hitting balls over the fence, everything." The former tennis great recalled, "My parents were ashamed and finally refused to come to a single match." Arthur Ashe threw his racket for the first time when he was 10. Ronald Charity, the man who introduced the boy to tennis, took him to Dr. Robert W. Johnson, a black physician and tennis enthusiast in Lynchburg, Virginia. The training sessions were long and demanding. In the segregated South during the 1950s, Dr. Johnson knew the tournament directors would kick black kids out of their tournament if they could find any reason. The Arthur Ashe I played against as a teenager was under control, seemingly impenetrable. As a youngster, Bobby Jones was beating everyone at the local golf club, but he had a hot temper. He earned the nickname Club Thrower. Jones became friends with an elderly man everyone knew as Grandpa Bart, who worked part-time in the pro shop. At age 14, Jones played in the National Amateur, but came home a loser. "Bobby, you're good enough to win the tournament," Grandpa Bart told him, "but you'll never win until you control that temper of yours." Jones knew the old man was right, but it was 7 years later before he won a tournament. Bobby was 14 years old when he mastered the game of golf. Grandpa Bart said, but he was 21 before he mastered himself. When you let anger get the best of you, it usually brings out the worst in you. Basketball player Latrell Sprewell choked his coach, Roberto Alomar, spit in an umpire, and became one of the most rivaled players in baseball. After Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear, he was ordered to undergo a psychological examination. Uncontrolled anger has led to riots and even death in sports arenas. A few years ago, I was asked to write a sports psychological manual for the Seattle Mariners. I interviewed some of the team's top players. One of them was Edgar Martinez. His manager, Lou Piniella, loves the guy. "Edgar is so professional," Piniella said. "Nothing phases him. He's as cool as a cucumber at the plate." During my interview, I asked Martinez what was the biggest jump for him, personally, going from minor leagues to the majors. His answer surprised me. "I worked a lot on my emotions," Martinez said. "I don't have a real bad temper, but I can remember some things I've done in the past, like hit the wall or hit the helmet box. But I learned from experienced players that that's not what you do. Don't let your teammates or the other team know that you're down or struggling. It's going to hurt your teammates because they're not going to trust you. If you're going to get upset, don't do it on the field. Go to the bathroom or someplace where you are alone and just let it go." I think that's the best advice I've been given, Borg soon learned. A player who cannot control his temper on the court will never become a great player. Jack Nicklaus asks a good question. How many shots would you have saved if you've never lost your temper? Never got down on yourself, always developed a strategy before you hit, and always played within your capabilities. That was bad. The best athletes are masters of their emotions and not servants to them. A batter who is controlled by anger and frustration is likely to be successful in his next time at the plate. Isn't likely to be successful in the next time at the plate. He presses. He feels like he is trying to hit a 3-home run with no one on base. Pitcher Jane Palmer said whenever he became angry, he sat down and tried to analyze what he did wrong and corrected it the next time. The legendary Satchel Paige, who pitched in a major league game at the age of 59, said, "If your stomach disputes you, lie down and pacify it with cooling thoughts." Simple words, wise advice. Chapter 6. Of all the hazards, fear is the worst. Sam Snead. The absolute worst thing a receiver can do is worry about not catching the ball or about getting hit. Jerry Rice. The Phoenix Fire Department is as selective in employment as a professional sports team. Those who want to become firefighters must have the right stuff. Trainees are required to perform many demanding tasks, including climbing the tall ladder in full gear used in rescues. For the past 20 years, I have been training booters, firefighter recruits, on the mental aspects of performance. I often give a classroom demonstration. It is a test you can take for yourself. If I asked you to stand on the seat of a chair or on the tabletop, would you have a problem doing that? Probably not. But what if that chair or table were 20 stories in the air, and I asked you to perform the same task? What thoughts would you have? How would you feel? Could you do it? The task is the same. So, what is the difference? For many, it's a 4-letter word: fear. Fear is a mental response to a perceived danger or threat. As former golfing great Sam Snead said, fear is the worst hazard because it creates tension, doubt, or even panic. While on an African safari, Snead once shot a charging wild elephant that was 30 yards in front of him. It didn't hit the ground until it was right at my feet, Snead recalled. I was a bit scared, but a 4-foot putt scares me to death. Fear releases chemical hormones that can inhibit performance and shut you down. When you are afraid in sports, you play small because you're focusing on the negative. You worry about making mistakes. I recently played my college roommate in golf. Chris was captain of our college basketball team while I captained the tennis team. We have been competing against each other for almost 30 years, with bragging rights on the line. I'm a much better golfer than Chris. I should beat him, but when he comes to Arizona and we play on my home course, where I should hold a big advantage, I don't perform well. Instead of playing mind games, I play it safe. I play not to lose. I play small. I play scared. Fearful of running the ball past the hole and 30-putting and losing a stroke to my opponent's handicap, I choke up and leave the first putt short and 3-putt away. What I've had to learn, what I'm still working at, is not to let fear control me. Stop worrying about making a mistake. Fear is something we learn as kids. A big coach might yell, "You screwed up again," or "How can you be so stupid?" Youngsters internalize those critical messages. From an early age, they would have developed a fear of failure, a fear of doing the wrong thing. I have great admiration for the Special Olympics program. Its motto, "Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave and attempt." Coaches and volunteers provide what every athlete needs: encouragement and support. Most Special Olympians, children and adults who are mentally challenged have no fear of failure when they run a 50-meter race, do the long jump, or throw a shot put. Fear lives in the future. These athletes live in the present, the here and now. Their participation is fun and rewarding. Fear reminds me of the wizard in the magical land of Oz. It is an unseen presence, a booming voice behind a curtain. Fear is as big and powerful as we imagine it to be. Some athletes resist fear, or some try to deny it. Others attempt to conquer it. I suggest one shouldn't do any of those things. Fear is a natural part of performance. Former Olympian Bruce Jenner said, "Fear is part of the process. If you weren't scared, you'd be in trouble." When you resist fear, you're only keeping it alive. It's like trying to hold a ball underwater. The more you fight it, the more pressure you're building up. Athletes should accept fear and recognize it as the body's way of telling them to become energized. Don't let fear haunt you. Instead, haunt your own fears. Pull down the curtain anyway. Unmask your fears and face them down. Examine them. Many times, when fear starts to hit me, my best chance of overcoming it lies in facing squarely and examining it rationally, Jack Nicklaus said. Here is what I say to myself. Okay, what are you frightened of? You're obviously played well overall. You're always telling yourself to get your biggest kicks out of the challenges of golf. Well, go ahead and enjoy yourself. Play each shot one at a time and meet the challenge. I once lived alongside the Orange Tree Golf Course in Scottsdale, Arizona. My house was about 240 yards from the tee box of the 17th hole. It amazed me at how often I would find two golf balls in my backyard, one within 4 foot of the other, both bearing the same company logo. Apparently, one weekend golfer feared slicing his drive out of bounds. His negative thinking helped create the results he feared most. When he teed up the second ball, he worried about making the same mistake, and usually did. Al Henderson, a former coach of the U.S. Olympic archery team, said, Fretting about the shot you just made will get you another just like it." Jerry Rice, the all-pro wide receiver, learned how worrying can undermine performance. "I've matured," he said. "When I drop passes, I don't get down on myself the way I did when I was a rookie. On the short drops, I used to tense up. I tried to do too much. I started to think too much, instead of just doing what I had done in practice 1,000 times. Catch the ball. I worried about dropping the ball." How does fear limit your life, your performance? What thoughts accompany your fears? What physical sensations do you experience? Many great athletes use anger as motivation, also turn fear into an ally. Listen again to Bruce Jenner. "I was scared to death, but I made fear score points for me. Fear is right behind me. Fear is 6 inches off my back. That's where fear is. I can feel his presence, but it's not going to catch me. I'm going to take fear and use it to my advantage. Remember, fear doesn't keep you safe. Your training does."